The following program presents principles designed to promote good health and is not intended to take the place of personalized professional care. The opinions and ideas expressed are those of the speaker. Viewers are encouraged to draw their own conclusions about the information presented.
Hello and welcome to Health for a Lifetime. I'm your host, Don McIntosh, and today I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Hans Diehl to our program. Welcome, Dr. Diehl.
Glad to be here.
Today we're going to talk about something that's a little different than maybe the normal lecture that you give. You're involved in what's called the Coronary Health Improvement Program, the CHIP program, 30-day program that helps people reverse coronary artery disease. Yes. You've just come out with a new video series that's available for communities where people that want to change not only their own lives but the lives of the community can be involved in that. But today you want to talk about love and forgiveness. How does that match up?
Yeah. You see, I don't think that hardening of the arteries is the most devastating disease, even though I spend a lot of time on that, right? But you know, the most devastating disease is really hardening of the attitudes. It's a kind of a spiritual atherosclerosis where our attitudes get stiffened and hardened, and we're no longer flexible to deal with the issues of life in a productive manner.
How can we know whether or not we're suffering from this disease?
Well, people will let you know about that. Yes, they pick it up. You see, but many times people don't understand that there's a relationship between emotions and, emotions and physical illness. You know, it seems to be so obvious to us, it should be, and yet many times we didn't understand that. Some years back, Dr. Harold Wolf, one of the Eastern Medical Center prominent physicians, had a very interesting case. He had a patient coming to him who had suffered some kind of a gun wound to his stomach.
Okay.
And somehow, for some reason, luckily for the physician, but maybe not quite so luckily for the patient, that wound did not want to heal.
So his stomach was open.
The stomach was open. And this afforded now this research-oriented scientist physician to have a chance to look into the inside of the stomach.
So he took advantage of his bad situation.
Yes, that's right. Some people even thought maybe he purposely did everything he could not to let this wound heal too fast, because this was a fascinating experiment. This is years back now. We had no idea how the stomach digests food, and this physician now had an unusual opportunity to look into the stomach. Here's something that happened. The patient came to him. The patient was irritated. The patient was crimson red. The patient was agitated. And the physician does his usual thing. He looks into the open wound, into the stomach inside. All right. And what do you think he sees? He sees an inside lining that is crimson red. It's bloated, and there's a lot of acid pouring out. And all of a sudden, a light goes on in the mind of this physician. Could it be that this emotional state of that patient and what I see on the inside of the stomach, could there be a relationship?
So that he whenever, did it go away when he was not upset?
Yes. When the patient would come into him relaxed, the stomach lining was relaxed. It wasn't that crimson red. There was not all that acid pouring out. Everything was looking pretty nice and fine and calm, as the exterior of the face, so the inside lining of the stomach. And so we became aware that emotions can have a powerful effect on our level of health. This was the beginning, really. Yeah, since those early observations, we now know that some people can respond to harbored negative emotions with asthma, migraine, ulcers, and even angina attacks. Emotions then break down the life force and invite disease and death. Or they can actually promote health it depends on the kind of emotions. Our health and our happiness then depend really in part on how we react to life's challenges and how we solve daily problems, doesn't it?
So it's we're not to be we're to react in an actively positive way, regardless of what comes.
Yes. Well, as a matter of fact, you know, how we relate to the problems of life, how we react to everyday occurrences determines largely how well we are going to be growing. For instance, there are some people, and I guess we all do it, we actually, instead of welcoming facing problems in life and learning from it, we actually try to get out of these problems. You know, we have different ways, mechanisms of how to do this. Some people ignore the problems. They blame others for the problems. They try to avoid problems. They deny that any problem exists. Or, you know, sometimes we also find ways like drowning these problems. And yet in the process, we really only hurt ourselves, don't we? Because when you solve problems, it leads to growth, to insight, to character development, all the things that we miss out on when we try to stay away from these things.
So put the fire out, don't just ignore it.
Yeah.
Correct. Be involved in the solution.
But don't solve other people's problems either.
So someone once said, if you're not part of the problem, then you're not part of the solution either. Would that be true?
I guess. Yeah. But you see, when you don't get involved in solving problems, you usually lose out on the area of overcoming poor habits, trying to deal with some of the boredom in life. We begin to stagnate. So when you say yes to problem solving, problems that come your way, you have the opportunity for growth, insight, understanding, and it really enriches our life, doesn't it? You know, as a matter of fact, I have come to some interesting conclusions. It's probably very simplistic, but I have come up with some very basic insight, I guess. And that is that life either makes you bitter or it makes you better. Really?
That's probably true. Well, it is true. Bitter or better. That's a good way to put it.
I mean, we all have disappointments in life. I mean, they say life is not fair to us, right? I mean, that's how the saying goes. So how do we react to it? It's going to make you bitter or it's going to make you better. But you know, everything depends on our ego, on that I. See? If we feel that somebody's trampling on our rights, who dares to do this to me? Well, see, now life is making you bitter instead of saying, what can I learn from this? Why is this happening to me? Is there a lesson in it for me? Right?
So change the I to an E.
Yeah, that's right. From bitter to better.
To better.
See, in life, it really all, you know, it's not so important really what happens to us in life, but how we relate to that.
So if we're, you know, if we become a spiritual Unabomber or a physical Unabomber or something, if we're bitter, we get upset at ourselves and the whole society, and we can be very damaging. It defiles many. The author of Hebrews put it that way. It defiles all kinds of people. So it's really essential.
Yeah, life is going to make us bitter or better. It all depends on how we relate to it. You know, who is in the driver's seat? Who holds our hand? See? Do we just think about ourselves as a center of the universe? And if we do, we're in trouble. I remember some time ago, there was a story about a society woman, a high society woman. I mean, she would always go to this special, not just the restaurant, but to that very special hotel. It was the #1 hotel in New York. And she always would have her hideaway there. 1 week, that was her private time. Nobody knew where she was. Nobody was supposed to know. This was her time. Penthouse suite, no disturbance. I'm going to be there. My time. Leave everybody out. And everybody knew that. I mean, everybody respected that lady. She was a good customer for years. And then it happened. She comes to the hotel. It's 10 o'clock at night. And just as she is settling in there, somehow she hears a lot of noise, music. Somebody's playing the piano. She is enraged. She's calling down to the desk and she says, I want to see the GM, the general manager, right now. Well, you know what they do? They call the general manager at home. Yes, madam. I'll be there right away. He gets dressed. He dashes over to the hotel. He goes up to the penthouse suite, and he says, Madam, we made a terrible mistake. We want to profoundly apologize. We have done the impossible. Can I explain to you?
All the way from home. She was a high society, just responds to her whims. So, you know, I think this is a good time to break. I hope you don't mind.
Oh.
Because you need to come back and hear what happens with this lady. Come back and join us.
Have you found yourself wishing that you could shed a few pounds? Have you been on a diet for most of your life, but not found anything that will really keep the weight off? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, then we have a solution for you that works. Dr. Hans Deal and Dr. Eileen Ludington have written a marvelous booklet called Reversing Obesity Naturally, and we'd like to send it to you free of charge. Here's a medically sound approach successfully used by thousands who were able to eat more and lose weight permanently without feeling guilty or hungry through lifestyle medicine. Dr. Deal and Dr. Ludington have been featured on 3ABN, and in this booklet, they present a sensible approach to eating, nutrition, and lifestyle changes that can help you prevent heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer. Call or write today for your free copy of Reversing Obesity Naturally, and you could be on your way to a healthier, happier you. It's absolutely free of charge, so call or write today.
Welcome back. We've been talking with Dr. Hans Deal. Normally, Dr. Deal, you talk with us about heart disease. Today, you're talking about hardening of the attitudes, love and forgiveness. And at the break, you were telling a very exciting, interesting story about this lady of high society. As I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, she was at a very famous hotel in New York. She took that week vacation, and she liked to have things done a certain way. But then next door, there was this terrible racket of someone playing the piano. She called the manager. The manager comes and says, we're very sorry. And then we didn't have time. We had to go to a break. What happened?
You know, the manager was very, very apologetic, obviously. And then he said, you know, we have made a terrible mistake. We somehow placed Arthur Rubinstein next to you because that was the only place where we had the grand piano. And
You mean the Arthur Rubinstein?
The Arthur Rubinstein. And all of a sudden, this woman said, Arthur Rubinstein.
Quite a racket, huh?
And all of a sudden, she wanted nothing more but to be allowed to go next door and to sit at the feet of the master. And she sat there for hours. And when she got back home, she would tell all of her friends that she was the special guest of Arthur Rubinstein.
Everything had to do with attitude, huh?
It was attitude,
Perspective.
right? I mean, it was the same person, it was the same music, but before it was noise and racket, and now it was heavenly music. What made the difference?
Yeah, I suppose it was the perspective of knowing what she was involved in and
Correct.
changing the attitude. But let me ask you a question. Is it true then, would you say, that we need to have a bigger perspective? We need to maybe surrender some of our rights until we have the whole picture? What would you say?
Yeah, I think as long as we think of our rights, I have a right, how can they do this to me? We have a tendency to go in the pity pot. Why me? Poor me. And when that happens, that opens up then the doors to all these negative emotions. It opens up the doors to resentment, to bitterness, to anger, to hatred, you know, the guilt, and actually you become enslaved, right? And to think that this is all related to the spiritual atherosclerosis, poor attitudes. They begin out to block.
It's a clot.
Yeah, they block the channels of communication, right? It's a spiritual atherosclerosis, and oftentimes it becomes almost like a spiritual cancer that is growing. And in the process, you know, we talk about people that look like prunes. You know, I mean, you know, they shrivel up from the inside out.
So what can we do, doctor?
What can we do? Well, maybe I can tell you another story from what happens sometimes in our professional lives. I had a woman come to me one time, and I was seeing some people in counseling. And this woman came to me because of her overeating problem. She said that she would go into binges and she just couldn't control herself. And so I was taking just a very careful inventory of her life. And I wasn't even halfway through the 10-minute interview to do that part of our program when she blurted out, "And he did this to me." And I looked at her and I said, "What do you mean, he did this to me?" "She did it to me." And I looked at her, and all of a sudden I realized there was a problem here. And then it came out. She said, this woman betrayed the professional trust between herself as a nurse and my husband, a cardiovascular surgeon.
Affair or something.
Affair. And I was stunned at the response. And then I was even more stunned when I asked her, "And when did this happen? Is this still going on?" She said, "No, it was 13 years ago." And I thought to myself, 13 years ago, and this woman is still distressed, still focused on that particular tragedy. You know, we do not want to brush over that, really.
What the people did was wrong.
What the people did was wrong. It hurt, obviously. But harboring these emotions of hurt for 13 years, I mean, did this really improve her marriage relationship to her husband?
Doesn't sound like it. It sounds like it added some pounds to her.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, when I talked with her, she said, "I know everything about that woman. I know how heavy she is. I know what she's wearing. I know where she's at." This woman became this person's emotional focus.
So she was enslaved to that situation.
Yeah, she was enslaved. Instead of moving on and developing perhaps a new understanding of herself and her husband, and perhaps beginning to see how can we connect better so that we have a solid relationship, what can we do? No, she became a totally focused person on the other person and thus. And here's what she said in the notes that I took down. I brought them with me here. She said, when I finally gained some insight, here's what I learned. The moment I started to hate that woman, I became her slave. I couldn't enjoy my work anymore because she controlled my thoughts. I became fatigued. The work I once enjoyed became drudgery. Even vacations ceased to be joy. I could not escape her tyrannical grasp on my mind until I focused on my life and what I was going to do with it. It's pretty powerful, isn't it?
So she was enslaved by that person, yeah. And so she understood what the problem really was.
She gained that insight. That was very, very powerful. You see, now life was no longer necessarily the bitter pill, but she related now in a more better understanding. Yes, life was difficult, but she began to relate to it, and out of that came that insight and greater self-understanding, greater sensitivity towards these kind of issues in life, personal growth, more communication skills, perhaps, and a new form of freedom.
Do you find this a lot in the classes you teach, for instance, your CHIP program, different things? Are there underlying problems that really you sense you're dealing with?
I think you're on a very good track there. Go a little bit further.
Well, you know, these the programs that you run as helping people with heart disease and all these different things, do you find when you really get to know the people personally, which probably you can't with the amount of people, that there really are some of these issues like this lady was focusing underneath?
I think so. You know, particularly when it comes to obesity, particularly with ladies in our society, they oftentimes have been abused verbally or otherwise by usually relatives, loved ones, marriage relationships. And it's not just good enough to help them to understand how to better choose food and how to get an exercise program, but it also is important to begin to look for these blockages, the blockages in the arteries, the channels of communication, to feel that you are worthwhile, that you have self-esteem in spite of how people may have abused or treated you.
So we've gotten the spiritual blood work back. We've had a diagnosis now. We've seen that the problem is hardening of the spiritual arteries or attitudes. What would you say that the treatment is?
You know, the treatment is probably not always an easy one. And there are probably different aspects to the treatment. But I think one of the key ingredients, I think, would have to be to help people understand that you can only go from resentment and bitterness to insight and understanding and growth through the dynamic of being willing to forgive and to accept.
Forgiveness and acceptance.
Forgiveness and acceptance. And sometimes we have to learn to forgive ourselves. And sometimes we have to be willing to forgive others who may have done this to us. But if we were in their shoes, maybe we would understand why this actually happened. And sometimes we have to also find the forgiveness by going to a higher source. Sometimes it takes God to come into a person's life that can now provide that ultimate source of healing by saying, yes, I'll give you the strength and the power and the faith to do that which is humanly oftentimes next to impossible to do, and that is to forgive somebody else.
Would you say everyone has to come to this understanding of forgiveness and acceptance, and it's something everyone has to come to terms with?
It is a human condition, isn't it? We all do things wrong, all of us.
Yeah,
and so we have to learn to maybe not just forgive ourselves, but to find that power, to find that God who is there, who says, I'm love and I'm forgiving you, and to give us the strength to go on. And then we fall again, right? Well, look, I forgive you once. That's it. No. We are growing, and we get stronger every time. And so out of that sense of knowing that someone is forgiving us on the human level and on the, shall we say, the vertical level, comes in the strength that we become more open to forgive others.
So really, when we're helping people with health or we're helping them with these issues, it's really coming down to this core blockage, forgiveness.
It really is. I mean, you can eat all the alpha sprouts you want. You can do all the exercise you want. But if you hate that person that is in your life, do you have health? No. See? And so that's where I think we have to deal with the atherosclerosis of the spiritual area. See? We have to take care of the hardening of our attitudes. And life has a tendency to harden us somehow, almost to, we do it to protect ourselves, but really in the process we lose out from the richness of life that comes to us.
When you begin your programs, your health programs, your CHIP program, I believe it's like a 30-day program, you don't start out with this, though. Where does this come?
This usually comes towards the end of the program. And that's when people come to me and say, we enjoyed the presentations about health, how to lose weight, how to bring our blood pressure down. We learned how to lower our cholesterol and have less adrenal pain. These are wonderful discoveries for us. And we have become involved in implementing those. But the most important part of the program to some of us has been how to let go of these resentments, the bitterness. I mean, think about that. We still shoot arrows of acid at people that have died years ago. We still hate them. And you see, and we become our own prisoner.
That's right. So how do we, let's talk about that situation that you've talked about. That's a very difficult situation where someone that maybe a parent, maybe a father, maybe a mother, maybe an aunt, an uncle, or someone else that has really hurt us, and we have cause we think to be bitter, has died. How in the world would you help someone when they can't go back and close that?
It's very difficult, isn't it? I think you have to find a substitute for the parents, let's say in this example. You have to find someone that you can relate to. Maybe it's a clergyman. Maybe it's a professional counselor that can stand in the part, be in the boots of that person that has harmed you. And you can now unload, perhaps, but you can also come to grips with the fact, well, maybe my parents did the very best as they understood it. See, I don't think that I've been raised perfectly, and I think most people feel that way. But I have to believe in my heart that my dear mother and father have done their very best as they understood it at the time. And therefore, it softens in my heart, and I begin to assume responsibility for my own life instead of trying to blame it on background.
And even if we can't seem to do that, there's the Christian religion, baptism, foot washing. These are very healing times where we can wash that away. That's been my experience.
Yeah, that's very good. You know, I read the story one time about a Mrs. Hannah who had lost the most precious of all of her possessions that she still had, her own daughter. She had been murdered in cold blood. The man was sentenced to prison for life, but that wasn't the end for Mrs. Hannah. Every day she would have her daily routine. She would go into her basement of our house. The picture was there on the dartboard, and she would throw these darts. Did that solve the problem?
Just probably fed it.
Yeah. And then one day, a Gideon would come to our house. You know,
Bible, they'd bring
yes. And he said, would you be willing to sign this Bible because we want to take it to the prison? Oh, she was infuriated. She was incensed that anybody could be so insensitive after all. Her daughter had been killed. And now what happened is that Gideon said to her while leaving, you know, Mrs. Hannah, how can God forgive us if we cannot forgive others?
Ooh, that's exactly what she needed to hear, wasn't it?
That was very painful. She probably prayed about that, and over the next 8, 9, 10 weeks, she came to the conclusion that she had to do that. She called him up, he came, and she wrote into the Bible, Mrs. Hannah loves you.
Wow. That was a major breakthrough for her, wasn't it?
It was the breakthrough. He takes the Bible back. The prisoner sees the handwriting, breaks down, says, I have never been loved in my whole life. I was an orphan. And it turned the life around of this man who now becomes a chaplain in that prison. And Mrs. Hannah, her life has changed now too, because the prisoner was really herself. Do you see? And so forgiveness restores relationships.
Boy, that's almost the same story as the gospel, isn't it? He gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes will not perish but have everlasting life. Forgiveness. He sends a letter to us, says, I love you even though you killed my son.
Yes.
We've been talking with Dr. Hans Diehl. We've been talking about heart disease, not just of our literal heart, but also of our spiritual heart. We have seen that there are problems with our attitudes. There's bitterness that we foster. Dr. Diehl has reminded us that we can move from bitterness to betterness by looking at forgiveness and acceptance. And if we do this, and maybe right now you're watching the program and you say, look, I need to do that. I encourage you to just send up a prayer right now, and you'll have health not only for here and now, but for a lifetime.